No one will notice you.
Have you ever been told you are entirely invisible? As Sylvia stood in the cold, drafty corridor of her own home, her flesh and blood laughed in her face. "No one will notice you," her sister sneered. She was right, but the most powerful man in England was about to prove her wrong. The rain battered mercilessly against the warped, leaded glass of Somerset Hall, a grand but decaying estate resting on the edges of Hampshire. Inside, the chill was bone-deep, but the atmosphere in the drawing room was downright feverish. It was the peak of the 1883 season, and the Davenport family was standing on the precipice of absolute ruin. Sylvia Davenport knelt on the threadbare Persian rug, a mouthful of steel pins clamped between her lips. Her fingers, calloused and pricked a dozen times over, worked frantically to hem the cascading layers of emerald green silk. Above her stood Arabella, 19, radiant and utterly ruthless. Arabella was the family's final gamble. With their late father having squandered the Davenport fortune at the card tables of Brooks's Club in London, the estate was heavily mortgaged to Coutts & Co. The bank's deadlines had come and gone. Arabella had to secure a proposal tonight, or they would be turned out into the streets. "Tighter at the waist, Sylvia," Arabella commanded, admiring her reflection in a tarnished mirror. "Lady Henrietta says the Duke of Westcott favors a narrow silhouette. Do be careful, you clumsy girl. You are pulling the bodice." Sylvia removed the pins from her mouth, her voice steady but exhausted. "If I pull it tighter, Arabella, you won't be able to draw breath to speak to him." "I don't need to speak to him," Arabella replied, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "I only need him to look at me." "Not that you would understand anything about capturing a gentleman's attention." Sylvia swallowed the sharp retort that burned on her tongue. At 22, she was 3 years older than Arabella, and had been universally declared the plain sister. Her hair was a dark, unruly chestnut compared to Arabella's spun gold, her eyes a tempestuous, stormy gray rather than her sister's clear, striking blue. But Sylvia's true disadvantage wasn't her appearance. It was her sharp, unyielding mind. In London society, a woman with a head for mathematics, crop rotation, and property law was considered an unnatural aberration. Their aunt, Lady Henrietta Ashford, swept into the room, a flurry of purple taffeta and smelling strongly of lavender water and desperation. "Is the gown ready? The carriage is waiting." Alfred Sterling is not a man who waits for tardy debutantes. Alfred Sterling, the Duke of Westcott. He was the wealthiest peer in the realm, possessing vast estates spanning 3 counties, a formidable shipping empire, and a reputation as cold and unforgiving as the North Sea. He had spent the last 5 years expanding his monopolies in India and had only returned to London to fulfill his duty of producing an heir. The Westcott ball tonight was less of a celebration and more of an auction, with the Duke inspecting the season's offerings. "It is finished, Aunt," Sylvia said, tying off the final thread and snapping it with her teeth. She stood, her simple, faded brown day dress covered in stray threads and lint. Arabella twirled, the emerald silk catching the dim light beautifully. She looked like a queen. She looked like salvation. Then, she turned her icy gaze to her older sister. Sylvia was exhausted, pale, and desperately trying to hide the ink stains on her fingertips. For the past 6 months, Sylvia had been living a dangerous double life. To keep the creditors at bay, she had taken over the estate's ledgers. She had been secretly corresponding with the Duke of Westcott's estate manager, Mr. Harrison, regarding the sale of a small, coal-rich parcel of land bordering their estates. Knowing no man would negotiate business with a woman, she had signed all her correspondence as Mr. S. Davenport. Mr. Harrison had agreed to the terms, but the deed had to be signed and delivered tonight, or the bank would seize Somerset Hall by morning. "I need to come with you," Sylvia said suddenly, the desperation leaking into her voice, just to the outer hall. I
No one will
must
notice
speak with a
you.
gentleman in the Duke's employ. Lady Henrietta gasped, clutching her pearls. Are you mad? Look at you. You look like a scullery maid. Arabella laughed, a high, cruel sound that echoed off the damp plaster walls. She stepped close to Sylvia, the scent of her expensive French rose oil overpowering the room's mustiness. You? At the Westcott ball? In that horrid patched rag? Arabella reached out and dismissively flicked a stray thread from Sylvia's shoulder. Don't be pathetic, sister. Stay here in the shadows where you belong. If you went, you would only embarrass us. Truly, no one will notice you. They never do. Sylvia's jaw tightened. It is a matter of business, Arabella. Our survival depends on it. My beauty is our survival, Arabella snapped, turning her back. Come, Aunt Henrietta. Let us leave the spinster to her dust and ledgers. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, leaving Sylvia in the dim, silent hall. She walked to the window, watching the Davenport carriage disappear into the rainy night toward the glittering lights of London. A profound, aching loneliness settled over her, but it was quickly replaced by a hot, fierce wave of determination. She could not rely on Arabella. Arabella was a fool who thought a pretty face could conquer a man like Alfred Sterling. A man whose letters, even sent through his manager, spoke of sharp intellect and ruthless efficiency. Sylvia ran to her bedchamber and dragged out a heavy, cedar-lined trunk from beneath her bed. It had belonged to her late mother. She threw open the lid. The smell of mothballs and dried lavender filled the air. Beneath layers of tissue paper lay her mother's velvet evening gown. It was entirely out of fashion, a heavy, rich midnight blue velvet with a square neckline and long, fitted sleeves. There were no bustles, no frills, no pastel ribbons. It was stark, dramatic, and unforgiving. It was perfect. Sylvia stripped off her faded brown dress. She wrestled her way into the midnight velvet, struggling with the hooks, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pinned her unruly dark hair up in a severe, elegant twist, leaving her neck bare. She had no jewels, no gloves, no fan, but she had the signed deed of sale tucked securely into the hidden pocket of her skirts. She threw a dark woolen cloak over her shoulders, grabbed the last few coins from the household jar, and stepped out into the storm. She had a Duke's manager to find. The journey to Mayfair took an agonizing hour in a damp, rattling hackney cab. When Sylvia finally alighted onto the slick cobblestones of Grosvenor Square, she stood frozen, breathless at the sight before her. Westcott Manor was not merely a house, it was a palace of light. Hundreds of gas lamps blazed from the tall arched windows, casting long, golden reflections across the wet pavement. Carriages lined the street for a mile, discharging ladies wrapped in furs and silks and gentlemen in immaculate evening dress. The faint, melodic strains of a waltz, performed by a full orchestra, drifted through the heavy oak doors, cutting through the sound of the falling rain. Sylvia paid the driver and pulled her hood deep over her face. She knew she could never walk through the front doors. She had no invitation, and the liveried footmen guarding the entrance looked more like palace sentries than servants. Skirting the edges of the grand property, she slipped through a wrought iron gate that led into the sprawling, manicured gardens. The rain had softened to a mist. She navigated the gravel paths, searching for a servant's entrance or a terrace door. She found her opening at the side of the manor, a set of heavy French doors left slightly ajar to let the cool night air into what appeared to be a darkened wing of the house. Heart in her throat, Sylvia slipped inside. She found herself in a massive, cavernous room that smelled intensely of leather, parchment, and expensive cheroot smoke. It was the Duke's private library. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with thousands of leather-bound volumes, illuminated only by the dying embers of a fire in a grand marble hearth, and the ambient light spilling in from the gardens. She unclasped her wet cloak and draped it over a mahogany chair. The midnight blue velvet of her gown seemed to absorb the dim light, making her look like a phantom rising from the shadows. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the crisp parchment of the deed. Now, she just needed to locate Mr. Harrison without being thrown out as a vagrant. "You are lost, I presume." A voice, deep as a cello and cold as frost, shattered the silence. Sylvia gasped, spinning around. In the darkest corner of the room, standing by a heavy velvet curtain, was a man. He was tall, imposingly so, dressed in stark, immaculate evening wear. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid in one hand. As he stepped forward into the faint glow of the embers, Sylvia's breath hitched. He was strikingly handsome, but not in the soft, boyish way of the season's regular dandies. He had sharp, aristocratic features, a strong jaw shadowed by a rough evening stubble, and eyes so dark they appeared black. He looked tired, bored, and incredibly dangerous. I am not lost," Sylvia managed to say, lifting her chin to mask her trembling. "I am looking for someone." The man took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze sweeping over her. He took in her unfashionable velvet dress, her lack of jewels, her bare, rain-dampened neck. A flicker of genuine curiosity crossed his austere face. "Indeed? The ballroom is down the east corridor." "You are currently trespassing in a private sanctuary. Or did you hope to find a wealthy peer wandering in the dark to compromise?" The insult sparked a sudden hot flare of anger in Sylvia's chest, completely burning away her fear. "Do not flatter yourself, sir," she snapped, stepping toward him, her stormy gray eyes flashing. "I have no interest in trapping a husband, nor do I have the time for society games. I am here on urgent business. I am looking for Mr. 5. Harrison, the estate manager." The man paused, his glass hovering inches from his lips. He lowered it slowly.
No one will notice you.
"Harrison? What possible business could a woman at a ball have with with the Duke's estate manager?" Sylvia scrutinized him. His authoritative tone and his presence in the private library suggested he was someone of importance, perhaps a senior secretary, or maybe even Harrison himself. "Are you him?" she asked, her voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "Are you Mr. Harrison?" The man's lips twitched. He leaned back against a mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Let us say that I am in a position to handle Harrison's affairs. Who is asking?" Sylvia let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Thank God. She stepped closer, reaching into her pocket and pulling out the folded parchment. "I am here on behalf of Mr. S. Davenport of Somerset Hall. We have been corresponding regarding the sale of the Blackwood." "Pardon, the Blackwood adjacent." She quickly corrected herself, her mind racing. "The northern coal parcel in Hampshire. The bank intends to foreclose at dawn. I have the signed deed. Here. The funds must be transferred to Coutts & Co. immediately, as agreed in the letters." The man went perfectly still. The casual, bored demeanor vanished entirely, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. He looked from the deed in her hand up to her face, his dark eyes narrowing. "You are representing S. Davenport?" "I am," Sylvia said firmly. "Impossible," the man murmured, pushing off the desk and walking toward her. His sheer physical presence was overwhelming, but Sylvia refused to step back. "S. Davenport is a brilliant, stubborn old mule of a man who knows more about the yield of Hampshire topsoil than the Royal Agricultural Society. He negotiated the Duke, into a corner over mineral rights last month. S. Davenport is not a girl in a velvet dress." "I am not a girl," Sylvia said, her voice dropping an octave, ringing with defiance. "I am 22 years old, and I am S. Davenport. My name is Sylvia. I forged my father's signature on the initial inquiries, because I knew your Duke would never read a proposal penned by a woman. And I was right." The man stopped barely a foot away from her. The silence in the library was suddenly deafening, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the distant, muffled waltz. He stared down at her, a profound, unreadable expression on his face. "You wrote those letters," he said softly, almost to himself. "You mapped the subterranean water routes." "Yes. You threatened to sell the northern ridge to the railway conglomerate if the Duke did not agree to a 20% premium." "It was a bluff," Sylvia admitted, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The railway had no interest in the ridge, but I knew the Duke's pride would not allow a commercial steam engine to run visible from his country estate's drawing room." A sudden, sharp bark of laughter erupted from the man's chest. It was a rich, startling sound that seemed to chase the shadows from the room. He looked at her not with the dismissive boredom he had shown moments before, but with intense, blazing fascination. "A bluff," he repeated, shaking his head. "You successfully blackmailed the most ruthless man in England with a phantom train." "I did what I had to do to save my family," Sylvia said fiercely, holding out the deed. "Now, please, will you finalize the transaction? I must leave before my aunt and sister discover I am here." "My sister?" Sylvia's voice faltered slightly as Arabella's cruel words echoed in her mind. "No one will notice you." "She would be furious." The man reached out, but he didn't take the parchment. Instead, his large, warm hand gently wrapped around her wrist. His thumb brushed against the ink stains she had failed to scrub away. "Your sister is a fool, Sylvia Davenport," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate timbre that sent a shiver down her spine. "And so is Harrison, if he thinks he is handling this transaction." Sylvia frowned, a sudden, cold dread pooling in her stomach. She looked at his immaculate clothes, the confident, predatory grace of his stance, the undeniable authority in his dark eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. He smiled, a dangerous, breathtaking curve of his lips. "I am the man you blackmailed with a phantom train, Miss Davenport. I am Alfred Sterling." "The Duke of Westcott." Sylvia snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. The blood drained from her face. She had just insulted the Duke in his own home, admitted to forgery, and confessed to blackmailing him. She took a panicked step backward, her velvet skirts rustling heavily. "Your Grace, Do not run," Alfred commanded, his voice returning to that cello-deep authority, though his eyes remained locked on hers with a mesmerizing intensity. Before Sylvia could decide whether to flee into the rain or drop to her knees, the heavy oak doors of the library were thrown wide open. Light flooded the room, accompanied by the loud chatter of approaching guests. "Alfred, you cannot hide in here all evening," a jovial voice rang out. Lord Henry Cavendish, a prominent politician, strode into the room, followed closely by none other than Lady Henrietta and Arabella Davenport. Arabella, looking radiant and flushed from the dance floor, stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes darted from the tall, imposing figure of the Duke to the woman standing near him in the shadows. Sylvia froze. Arabella's blue eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in vicious disbelief as she recognized the faded ink stains, the unruly dark hair, and the midnight velvet. "Sylvia?" Arabella gasped, her voice echoing loudly in the sudden, tense silence of the library. Alfred Sterling slowly turned his head to look at Arabella. Then he looked back at Sylvia, his gaze softening into something entirely possessive and fiercely protective. He reached out and, in full view of London's elite, gently took Sylvia's ink-stained hand, raising it to his lips. "Ah, Lord Henry," the Duke said smoothly, never taking his eyes off Sylvia. "Allow me to introduce you to the most fascinating woman in London." Arabella's voice was a shrill dagger cutting through the heavy silence of the library. She stepped forward, her emerald silk gown rustling aggressively, her face pale with a mixture of confusion and mounting outrage. Lady Henrietta, trailing behind her niece, looked as though she might simply faint onto the Persian rug. "Sylvia, what on earth are you doing here?" Arabella demanded, dropping all pretense of
No
aristocratic
one
grace.
will notice you.
She turned her wide, frantic eyes to the Duke. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon. This is my spinster sister. She is prone to wandering. She has a fragile state of mind. We keep her strictly at home for her own protection." The sheer audacity of the lie left Sylvia speechless. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. Arabella was trying to paint her as a madwoman to salvage her own chances. Alfred Sterling, however, did not miss a beat. He did not release Sylvia's hand. Instead, his grip tightened slightly, a solid, grounding anchor in the storm of Arabella's malice. His dark eyes swept over Arabella with a chilling, clinical detachment. "A fragile state of mind?" Alfred repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "How utterly fascinating. Because this fragile woman has just spent the last 6 weeks negotiating a land acquisition that would make Baron Rothschild himself weep with envy. She possesses a sharper intellect than the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a strategic ruthlessness I have rarely encountered outside of Parliament." Lady Henrietta gasped, clutching Lord Henry Cavendish's arm for support. "Your Grace, surely there is some mistake. Sylvia only handles the household menus." "The only mistake, Lady Henrietta," Alfred replied, his tone dripping with aristocratic disdain, "is that you have kept a diamond locked in a coal cellar while parading glass to the ton." Arabella recoiled as if she had been physically struck. The cruel, beautiful mask shattered, revealing the petty, frightened girl beneath. She opened her mouth to argue, but the Duke ignored her entirely. He turned his attention fully back to Sylvia, his expression softening instantly. "Miss Davenport," Alfred said, bowing perfectly at the waist. "They are playing a waltz. It would be my immense honor if you would grant me this dance." Sylvia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Your Grace, I am not dressed for the ballroom. I have ink on my hands. I am meant to be invisible." "You could wear sackcloth, Sylvia, and you would outshine every woman in this house," he murmured, his voice meant only for her ears. "As for being invisible, I assure you, after tonight, no one in England will ever look past you again." Unable to resist the magnetic pull of his gaze, Sylvia nodded. Alfred placed her hand on his arm and led her out of the shadows of the library. They walked past a paralyzed Arabella and a hyperventilating Lady Henrietta, stepping out into the grand, illuminated corridor. The moment they entered the ballroom, the music seemed to falter. The collective breath of 500 members of London's elite was drawn and held. The Duke of Westcott, the most elusive and sought-after bachelor of the decade, had finally emerged. But he was not escorting a radiant debutante in pastels and pearls. He was leading a striking, dark-haired woman in a severe, unadorned midnight blue velvet gown that looked 50 years out of fashion, yet somehow made her look like a ruling monarch. Whispers erupted like a lit powder keg. Fans fluttered violently. Dowagers leaned in, their monocles flashing in the gaslight, desperate to identify the mysterious woman who had captured the Duke's arm. Alfred led her straight to the center of the polished floor. The orchestra, recovering its wits, struck up the opening chords of The Blue Danube. He placed one hand firmly on her waist, taking her ink-stained hand in his other. "Look at me, Sylvia," he commanded gently as they began to sweep across the floor. "Ignore them. They are nothing but noise. They are staring," she breathed, her cheeks flushed as they spun. "They are looking at my dress, my hair. They know I do not belong here. They are staring because they have never seen me look at a woman the way I am looking at you," he corrected smoothly, spinning her with a practiced, effortless grace. "Tell me about the subterranean water routes, Sylvia. How did you know the western edge of the ridge would flood if we drilled past 60 feet? Sylvia blinked, utterly disarmed. Here she was, dancing with a duke in front of the entirety of high society, and he wanted to discuss hydrogeology. A genuine, radiant smile broke across her face, transforming her features from severe to breathtakingly beautiful. "The soil composition," she explained, her confidence returning as she spoke of the things she knew. "The limestone deposits on the surface are a facade. Beneath it, the clay is non-porous. I read a geological survey commissioned by Prime Minister Gladstone's office 3 years ago regarding the neighboring valley. The water table simply has nowhere else to drain. Alfred stared down at her, utterly mesmerized. You are magnificent. I am practical, she countered. And speaking of practicality, Your Grace, what of the deed? Coots & Co. will foreclose on Somerset Hall by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If I do not return with proof of funds, my family will be ruined. The music swelled, and Alfred pulled her a fraction of an inch closer. Do not worry about Coots & Co. I will have my head banker, Mr. Hugh Lindsay, dispatch a rider to their offices before dawn. The matter of the ridge is settled. So the land is yours? No. Alfred smiled mysteriously, a wicked glint in his dark eyes. The game has changed, my brilliant Miss Davenport. But you may sleep soundly tonight. Somerset Hall will not fall tomorrow. When the waltz ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Alfred bowed to her, kissed the back of her hand, and personally escorted her to the front doors, ordering his own private crest-bearing carriage to take her safely back to Hampshire. As the carriage pulled away, Sylvia looked out the window to see Arabella standing on the manor's grand steps, watching her sister depart in the Duke's carriage, her face a portrait of absolute, venomous defeat. Dawn broke over Somerset Hall like a bruised peach, the pale morning light doing nothing to hide the peeling paint and crumbling masonry of the estate. Sylvia sat perfectly still in the drawing room, her velvet gown replaced by her usual faded brown day dress. The fire had burned down to ash. She had not slept a wink. At exactly 8:30, the sound of heavy carriage wheels crunching against the gravel driveway echoed through the quiet house. Arabella burst into the room, followed closely by Lady Henrietta. Both women looked haggard, their elaborate hairstyles from the night before half undone. "It is the bank!" Arabella cried, wringing her hands. Then she paused, rushing to the window. Her breath hitched. No, it isn't. It's a crested carriage. It is the Duke." A sudden manic hope flared in Arabella's eyes. She frantically pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and smoothed her skirts. "He has come! I knew it!" "He used you, Sylvia, to make me jealous. It is a common society tactic. He realizes I am the prize of the Davenport family. Hide yourself, quickly." Sylvia did not move. She remained seated in the high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her stormy gray eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors of the drawing room. The doors opened. The ancient family butler, trembling with awe, announced the arrivals. His Grace, the Duke of Westcott, and Mr. Hugh Lindsay, representing Coutts and Company. Alfred strode into the room, dominating the space entirely. He was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored morning suit of charcoal gray. Beside him stood a thin, bespectacled man carrying a heavy leather portfolio. "Your Grace," Arabella practically purred, stepping forward and sinking into a deep, elaborate curtsy. "What an unexpected honor. To what do we owe the pleasure of your company at this early hour?" Alfred did not even look at her. He stepped neatly around Arabella, as if she were a piece of poorly placed furniture, and walked straight to Sylvia. "Good morning, Miss Davenport," Alfred said, his voice warm. "Good morning, Your Grace," Sylvia replied, standing up to meet his gaze. "Mr. Lindsay." The banker bowed respectfully. "Miss Davenport, a pleasure to finally meet the architect behind the S. Davenport Correspondence." Lady Henrietta sputtered. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the banker speaking to my niece?" Alfred turned slowly to face the older woman, his expression hardening into stone. "Mr. Lindsay is here because there has been a significant change in the financial obligations of the Davenport estate." "You bought the Coleridge," Sylvia said, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "You promised the funds would cover the mortgage arrears." "I lied," Alfred said flatly. Sylvia felt the blood drain from her face. Arabella let out a triumphant, vicious little laugh. I knew it! You see? You ruined us, Sylvia. You played at men's business and you ruined us entirely. Silence! Alfred snapped, his voice cracking through the room like a whip. Arabella's mouth snapped shut. Alfred turned back to Sylvia, his eyes entirely sincere. I did not buy the Coleridge, Sylvia. When I realized exactly who I was dealing with last night, I dispatched Mr. Lindsay to Coates & Co. before the sun rose. I did not purchase a parcel of your land. I purchased your entire debt. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. You bought our mortgage, Lady Henrietta whispered, her knees visibly trembling. Your Grace, you are our sole creditor? I was, Alfred corrected. He gestured to the banker. Mr. Lindsay opened his portfolio and withdrew a thick stack of legal parchment, sealed with heavy red wax. He handed the documents directly to Sylvia. Under the recently passed Married Women's Property Act of 1882 and its subsequent provisions for unmarried women of age, a woman may legally hold property in her own right, Alfred explained, his eyes locked on Sylvia's shocked face. I have forgiven the debt entirely, on one strict legal condition. The title and deed to Somerset Hall and all its adjoining lands are hereby transferred solely and irrevocably into the name of Miss Sylvia Davenport. The parchment felt heavier than lead in Sylvia's hands. She stared at the Gothic script, seeing her own name written clearly as the sole proprietor of her ancestral home. No! Arabella shrieked, her voice cracking. That is impossible! She is a woman! She is my sister! She has nothing! She has everything, Alfred corrected coldly. She has the intellect to save this family, and the resilience to survive your cruelty. As of this moment, Miss Arabella, you and your aunt reside in this house, solely at the mercy and grace of Sylvia. She is the master of Somerset Hall. Arabella sank to the floor, the emerald silk of her discarded evening gown pooling around her as she began to sob, not out of sorrow, but out of pure, venomous defeat. The invisible sister had not only been seen, she had been crowned. Sylvia looked up from the deed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked at Alfred, seeing past the title and the wealth, seeing the man who had recognized her mind when the rest of the world had dismissed her entirely. Why? Sylvia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Why would you do this for me? It is a fortune. Alfred stepped closer, invading her personal space, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. Because a woman who can bluff me with a phantom train and map subterranean water routes is far too valuable to be lost to poverty. And because, he paused, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear, I have never in my life been bested in negotiations. I intend to spend the rest of my life studying the woman who managed it. The weeks that followed the Duke's shocking intervention fundamentally altered the fabric of Hampshire society. Sylvia did not evict her aunt and sister. She was too practical for petty vengeance. Instead, she placed them both on a strict, unyielding allowance. Arabella's endless stream of Parisian silks and French rose oil was abruptly halted, replaced by the bitter daily realization that she was now entirely dependent on the sister she had mocked as invisible. Alfred Sterling, meanwhile, did not simply fade back into the glittering drawing rooms of London. Instead, his heavy, crested carriage became a permanent fixture on the gravel drive of Somerset Hall. Their courtship was unlike anything the Tun had ever witnessed. There were no hushed whispers in garden mazes, no scandalous stolen kisses in the dark corners of ballrooms, and no chaperoned rides through Hyde Park. Instead, they spent hours locked in the Somerset Library. Maps of the English countryside were spread across the mahogany tables as they debated the intricacies of crop yields, the expanding railway lines, and the global trade routes of Alfred's shipping empire. Alfred treated her not as a fragile, decorative debutante, but as a sovereign equal. He challenged her mind, and in return, Sylvia brought a fierce, protective warmth to the cold, calculated world the Duke had inhabited for so long. But high society is a venomous beast. The aristocratic elite did not take kindly to the most powerful duke in the realm, bypassing the season's documented beauties for a penniless, now propertied spinster who openly wore ink stains on her fingers. The ultimate test of their defiance arrived late in the autumn of
No one will notice
1883.
you.
An exclusive, highly coveted invitation was delivered to Somerset Hall, sealed with the heavy royal crest of Marlborough House. Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, was hosting an intimate, private dinner. Alfred had officially requested Sylvia's presence as his personal guest. Arabella sneered when she saw the gold-embossed card resting on the silver foyer tray. "You cannot possibly go," she hissed, her jealousy twisting her beautiful features into something ugly. "The Prince of Wales surrounds himself with the most glamorous women in Europe, actresses, heiresses, renowned beauties. You will be a laughingstock, Sylvia. They will tear you apart like wolves." Sylvia looked at her younger sister, feeling no anger, only a profound, quiet pity. "Then I suppose I shall have to give them something far more interesting to chew on than my appearance." On the night of the royal dinner, Sylvia did not retreat to the safety of her mother's outdated midnight velvet. She commissioned a new gown. It was crafted of deep, rich burgundy silk, completely devoid of the lace, ruffles, and heavy bustles that defined the current fashion. It was cut with a sharp, architectural precision that perfectly matched the razor edge of her intellect. When she entered the grand hall of Marlborough House on Alfred's arm, the room went entirely still. The soft hum of string music seemed to falter. The Prince of Wales, a man historically known for his wandering eye and love of superficial beauty, approached them with a bemused, measuring smile. "Sterling," the royal murmured, his gaze drifting over Sylvia with intense curiosity. "You have kept London entirely deprived of your presence. Introduce me to the woman who managed to make you abandon the entire social season." Before Alfred could speak, a notoriously vicious society matron, Lady Jersey, stepped forward from the crowd with a syrupy, poisoned smile. "We hear Miss Davenport is quite the businesswoman, Your Royal Highness. It is said she handles her own banking and converses with estate managers. How extraordinarily masculine. One wonders if she intends to take a seat in the House of Lords next." A cruel, hushed titter rippled through the gathered elite. They were waiting for the kill. They expected Sylvia to flush, to stammer, to shrink back into the shadows where Arabella had always insisted she belonged. Sylvia did none of those things. She met the future king's eye with absolute, unwavering calm. "It is true, Your Royal Highness," Sylvia said, her voice clear and carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I find that a mind equipped to handle the complexities of soil management, subterranean water tables, and estate finance has very little patience for idle gossip. Though I suppose for those lacking such a mind, gossip is the only currency they have left to trade." The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Lady Jersey turned a mottled, furious shade of puce. For a terrifying second, no one dared to breathe. Then, the Prince of Wales threw back his head and roared with genuine, delighted laughter. "Splendid," the prince declared, clapping a heavy hand on Alfred's shoulder. "By God, Sterling! You have found a lioness! Come, Miss Davenport. You must sit beside me at the head of the table. I desperately wish to know your thoughts on the new agricultural tariffs Gladstone is pushing through Parliament." As Sylvia allowed the future King of England to lead her toward the dining hall, she glanced back over her shoulder. Alfred was watching her. The Duke of Westcott wore a look of such absolute scorching pride and raw devotion that it nearly stole the breath from her lungs. Later that evening, as they walked alone through the moonlit royal gardens, Alfred stopped beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. He did not drop to one knee. He did not offer flowery, hollow poetry. Instead, he took both of her bare hands in his thumbs tracing the faint calluses on her fingers. "I do not want a wife to sit quietly in my drawing room and embroider cushions, Sylvia," Alfred said, his dark eyes fierce and uncompromising in the pale moonlight. "I want a partner. I want the woman who forged a signature to save her home." I want the woman who silenced Lady Jersey and enchanted the Prince of Wales without batting an eyelash. Marry me. Bring your brilliant, ruthless mind to Westcott Manor, and let us rule it together." Sylvia looked at the man who had pulled her from the shadows, the man who had made sure the entire world saw her exactly as she was. "On one condition," she whispered, a slow, radiant smile curving her lips. "I continue to review all the estate ledgers." Alfred laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed into the night and pulled her into a passionate, consuming kiss. "I would expect nothing less. My brilliant S. Davenport." Did Sylvia's brilliant triumph and her thrilling romance with the Duke leave you completely breathless? Sometimes, the people society ignores the most are the ones holding the greatest power of all. If you love this historical tale of fierce intellect triumphing over vanity, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their true worth, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible historical dramas.